case taking up an impeachment, there was a proposal on the floor put together in a bipartisan way. 100 senators voted for the process on how they would go forward on the case of President Clinton. We would hope that they could come to some conclusion like that. But in any event, we're ready. When we see what they have, we'll know who and how many we will send over. That's all I'm going to say about that now. We've had a very eventful week. I'm so proud of our members and really in some cases the bipartisanship of some of this and some not. Last year's campaign, we said for the people, we would lower the cost of health care, starting with lowering the cost of prescription drugs and preserving the pre-existing condition benefit. Within the past week, we passed the Elijah Cummings Lower Drug Costs Now Act, which does just that. As we were passing it last week, we discussed the particulars of it. But with the savings that we gained from that, I think it's important to note that we already said we would be spending the hundreds of billions of dollars in savings on expanding benefits for Medicare, dental, visual, hearing, and in the biggest expansion of Medicare since its inception. Next, we did lower an important bipartisan bill, the appropriations bill, to keep government open and to do so early enough so that you knew to make your weekend plans and get started for all the holidays you may be observing. And that was a major accomplishment. It took constant back and forth. But we ended up, as I have always said, as an appropriator myself, one forged in that culture, left to their own devices, the appropriators can get the job done. And I salute Chairwoman Nita Lowey for her work, the ranking member as well. And we're very pleased with that legislation. I guess I'll take up cloture or something on the Senate pretty soon, and hopefully it will be on its way to the President for a signature. Before I leave the subject of impeachment, though, let me commend our sixth chairman, Adam Schiff. Adam Schiff, Jerry Nadler, Chair of Judiciary, so proud of him. Maxine Waters, Financial Services, Richie Neal, Ways and Means Committee, Elliot Engel, the Foreign Affairs Committee, and also a very important committee chaired now by Carolyn Maloney, the Gov Reform Committee. I said last night and I say today, while he isn't with us today physically here, Elijah Cummings is with us in spirit. A foundation he helped lay for justice is with us. And he said, when we're dancing with the angels, what will we know about what we did to keep the Constitution intact? When he said that, it was very prescient. Little did we know that by the time we passed the impeachment resolution, well, the articles of impeachment, that he would be dancing with the angels. Right now, as we speak, they're debating on the floor the U.S., Mexico, Canada trade agreement. I hear my colleagues on the floor last night saying, well, if we weren't doing this, we could do Mexico. Well, we are doing Mexico. And the discussion that took some time to convince the administration and the other countries was that we weren't going forward until we had the strongest possible enforcement of the trade agreement, and also manifested in the legislation that we'll have on the floor today, the implementing legislation. As you've heard me say over and over again, this is about enforcement, the overarching issue. If you can enforce it, it doesn't matter what you put forth. And of the concerns that we had, one were workers' rights, the other pharmaceuticals, and the other the environment. And we made giant progress from, first of all, over the existing NAFTA for sure. But apart from that, big distance between what the administration was proposing to begin with in all of those areas and to where we ended up now going forward. I'm very pleased to have the statement today that went out from the AFL-CIO, from Richard Trumka. He said, we are proud. He said, there is no denying that the trade rules in America will now be fair. Working people have created a new standard for future trade negotiations. I think it's a template for future trade agreement. Some of my members think, let's not give it that much. But we'll see how it goes in the implementation. That means everything. Then after that, today, we will do SALT, and that is going to be the state and local tax that the Republicans put on to punish blue states largely. It is paid for, this legislation, to repeal the SALT tax, and it will be paid for by increasing the rate on wealthiest individuals in our country. When the president first proposed his tax scam, they were saying, we're never going to lower the individual rate. And then they did. And now we will raise it again to repeal SALT. So we're very proud of what we have done. As you know, the Republicans keep saying, well, we should be working. We've sent over 400 bills, 275 of them sitting on Mitch McConnell's desk. Well, 400, but 275 of those, at least, are bipartisan. The range of subjects is, well, you've heard me say it, but it bears repeating, I think. That includes all of our top 10 pieces of legislation, bipartisan background checks, expanding background checks. People have to have a background check unless they buy it at a gun show, online, or in some kind of straw transaction. So this is not creating background checks. It is expanding them, and as well as the South Carolina. One is H.R. 8, the other 1112. 295 days ago, we sent those bills to Mitch McConnell, the Grim Reaper. I have news for him. He may think they're dead on arrival there, but they are alive and well in the general public. And every day that he does not take up that legislation, because he knows it will pass. He fears that it will pass, or else he'd take it up. Every day that he does not pass it, 100 people die. Not all of them would by gun violence. Not all of them would be saved by the legislation, but some. And so we urge him to take up that life-saving legislation. The list goes on. Paycheck fairness, equal pay for equal work, Violence Against Women Act, again, about women, the legislation to raise the minimum wage of the 30-some million, 32, 33 million people who will get a pay raise with the increase in the minimum wage. Over 20 million of them are women. The Equality Act and Discrimination Against the LGBTQ Community, Dream and Promise Act, the SAFE Act, Save Our Federal Elections Act, Butch-Lewis Act, Protecting Pensions for America's Workers, Farm Workforce Modernization Act, which we passed the other day. It was bipartisan support and has bipartisan support inside and outside the Congress. Again, lower drug costs now. One other bill that we did pass that we had an enrollment ceremony, perhaps some of you came, was the Future Act, and that was about minority-serving institutions, Hispanic-serving institutions, historically black colleges and universities, higher education institutions that deal with our Native American population. It's very important. We sent it. That did pass, and that is on its way to the president. So with that, I said to my members what I say to you guys all the time: the word recreate and recreate are the same words. They spelled the same, and they mean something the same. When you recreate, renew, rest up, be with your family, you are recreated to come back for the discussions and the debates ahead as we go into the future. And as we go into the future, again, we are inspired by our founders who said, e pluribus unum, from any one, no matter what our difference is. And they certainly had theirs. We always have to remember that we are one country. I have my speaker's pin on today, but many times I have on the flag pin, which said, one country, one destiny. We have to think in those terms, and we look forward to doing that as we go forward. We still have a day here as we go forward. So I wish you happy holidays, and whatever you are celebrating. In our house, we celebrate them all. Christmas, Hanukkah, Kwanzaa, New Year's, whatever else. But I hope you have it. Now I'll have time for a few questions. Nancy?
Do you run the risk as Start that again. Do you run the risk, as some Republicans have said, of looking like you're playing games with impeachment if you hold on to these articles for too long?
I said what I was going to say, Nancy. When we bring the bill, which is, just so you know, there's a bill made in order by the Rules Committee that we can call up at any time in order to send it over to the Senate and to have the provisions in there to pay for the impeachment. And then the next step, whatever you want to call it, the trial. That is where you put the managers. I was not prepared to put the managers in that bill yet because we don't know the arena that we are in. Frankly, I don't care what the Republicans say. Any other questions? Not on this subject. I've said this is it. I honored Nancy.
Last night you suggested you need to see a fair process.
U.S. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi speaking there on several issues, including, of course, the impeachment of Donald Trump, saying once again that no one is above the law and the president is also not above the law. Senior correspondent Owen Alterman is with me here in studio, as is our diplomatic correspondent Ellie Hochenberg. This is almost a moment for Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats. The spotlight is on her. What do you make of what she had to say right now? Wrap up for us what happened.
Well, Benita, she was willing to defend her position that she's not ready yet to hand those articles of impeachment over to the Senate. If 24 hours ago, 48 hours ago, you thought sitting on your couch or sitting on your subway train or bus watching the news and you thought that it was automatic that once the House had voted to impeach, that then the ball truly went over to the Senate court, well, we now have a surprise that that ball is still in the air, or more accurately, is still in Nancy Pelosi's hand, that the House has decided not necessarily yet to hand those articles of impeachment over, instead using it as a tactic to try to negotiate better terms from the Senate for that trial. Pelosi coming under attack from Republicans, from others for that position. She was asked about it here, willing to defend it, saying she doesn't care what the Republicans say, and still willing to tactically wait to hand those over. Again, we'll see what she ultimately decides to do. Again, Rita, there is still that school of thought that the Democrats should not hand those articles of impeachment over at all, because at the end of the day, the result in the Senate is known that Donald Trump will not be impeached. There's no way to get to that two-thirds majority. So that school of thought says, why not stop when you're ahead, leave it on the books as an impeachment and move on? Again, she has a few options ahead of her. We'll see what she chooses. At any rate, the pace of impeachment will slow down. Again, it won't be until, at the earliest, early next year after the Christmas recess, that the House will even be able to pass that bill Nancy Pelosi just talked about and send those articles of impeachment onward.
Senior correspondent Owen.